Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the No Bullshit Property Podcast, brought to you by CERT Property. We are here today with a special guest for our second episode, and with us here today is our very own Head of Design, Chris Hosty. Chris joined us about 6 months ago in the role of Head of Design, and he is an architect by trade, has designed some of the fantastic schemes that we've delivered, and he's now poacher turned gamekeeper, helping us take architects to task, helping us ensure that the schemes that we deliver are high quality in terms of not just materials and build, but high quality in terms of the experience we're delivering as well.
Before we get started with this episode, just a quick reminder to check out certproperty.co.uk, where you can find the latest UK property news, downloadable industry guides and much more to help you on your investment journey, so check it out.
So we'll introduce Chris and let him say a few words a little bit later about one of our key pillars as a business, which is our environmental impact. But before we get round to that, I've got my somewhat hungover co-host with me today, Mr. Paul Shakeshaft. How are you doing, Paul?
Slightly jaded today. Very slightly jaded. But,
two episodes
good.
in and you're showing your true colours.
Yes.
Anyway, enough about that. What's new? What's been happening in the industry before we go on to talk about environment? Anything to talk about?
It's been a busy month, really. We have filled our commercial property at Hilton House. We're now completely fully occupied. You know, contrary to the headlines out there, the market is especially buoyant, and what we're seeing is a massive demand for bigger workspaces and for businesses to come in and make much more social space for their employees, encouraging people to come back to the office. And now Hilton House is full. That's what we've seen on the floor plates there, that they're very much kind of hybrid socialising areas versus hot desks. So we're finally full there. We've also, as a company, we were just about to put out a webinar on the freehold reforms, which you are leading.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose that's a big piece of news for June, that at the end of June, one of the oldest pieces of, I suppose, property law and legislation is getting a long overdue amendment, and that is the abolition of ground rents. So, yeah, quite a monumental shift, really, and a really positive shift for landlords and buyers of leasehold properties going forwards, because there's been some fairly, shall I say, unscrupulous practices over the last few years by some developers with fairly unfair ground rent review provisions. And I think the government's seen that and obviously decided to act on it for the greater good for landlords, for residential leaseholders. So big monumental change there for the entire industry. For us as a developer, it poses some challenges, because actually the value of the freehold did comprise, you know, a key element of your appraisal. You know, you'd attach a value to that. So there is an impact that I suppose is less widely considered, and that is, you know, who's going to buy these freeholds, or who's going to be the owner of these freeholds over the long term if they're not revenue generating. You know, the pension funds that used to buy them aren't going to buy them anymore. So who's going to own these apartment blocks, and who's going to ensure high quality management? If you want to find out, tune in to our webinar, which will tell you all that and more about the Leasehold Reform Act. So yeah, I think that's the big thing that's happened out there in the industry this month. And like you were saying, really interesting to see the continued demand in the commercial property market and how that demand has changed post-COVID. And also the residential market. I mean, from our experience, you know, we're still getting lots of inquiries. All of our properties are fully let.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a real shortage of stock in the cities, and we're really seeing that now. We've got much more applicants than properties to let. We're 100% occupied, as Howard said, and you know, the rents are getting up to 25% more than they were this time last year. So there's a real demand out there, and we need your properties and we need more built. And yeah, it's mad out there. It really is.
A little plug for our property management service there. Even managed to do that with the hangover you've got. So, with Paul being so out of sorts,
I'm really getting it today.
I mean, you gave it me last time, so I think it's probably a good time to introduce our guest, Chris Hosty. So, already done the introduction, but if there's anything else you think I've missed there, Chris, and done you a disservice, welcome to Chris.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on.
For those who don't know, the reason why we're talking about our environmental impact in June is because the 5th of June was actually World Environment Day. And we thought it was a perfect time to talk about one of our key pillars, which is environment and our environmental impact, when we're creating the built environment. So, yeah.
Thanks, Howard. Yeah, I should have give a bit of background to what I'm going to talk about. And I think as developers, it's exactly that. What's our impact on the environment, and what are our aspirations here at CERT? And I think to do that, we will go on a little journey if you'll come along with me.
Take me there.
I want you to imagine living in a house where you'll hardly need to turn the heating on, where the sun does a lot of that for you, a lot of the heating of your home, where it's orientated to benefit from natural light, so you don't need to have the lights on as much, where it makes its own electricity through PV and solar panels, where it might heat water through solar water heating, and where the water for flushing your toilet is free because you've collected it off your roof and stored it. And in Manchester there's lots of that, so
not so much of the sunshine.
Actually,
that's true. How that's going to work.
You might not be able to charge your phone, but you can flush your toilet. Where the building itself, can act as a carbon sink because it's made from carbon neutral or carbon negative materials such as timber. Where you can't hear your neighbours arguing because the walls and the windows are so well insulated and sealed, and that's for the reason of preventing heat loss in winter and overheating in summer. Where your car can act as a battery store for the electricity produced by those solar panels, and maybe wind power generation on site as well, so that the electricity can be stored when it's sunny and windy and then drawn out of your car for when it isn't. And where the food waste you produce can be composted, and the methane released from that compost can be used to cook more food, and then the compost itself can be spread on the garden or the allotments. And the concepts there that I'm talking about aren't new. They've been around a while, and I'm going to give developers a bit of a dig now. You talked about poacher turned gamekeeper, and that certainly is an aspect of what I'm doing. I think I can affect change a lot better from the client side than potentially from the consultant side, and I know that's part of the reason that you brought me in was to do just that, was to actually really drive these ethics in everything that we do. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 months, understanding how we can try and get to that aspirational house that I hope that we've all just imagined.
So that aspirational house, I mean, put it in simpler terms, is like a zero carbon home.
I think that's the aspiration. Zero carbon. Within CERT, we've set out that aspiration to become a zero carbon company by 2040, which is 10 years earlier than the government target. And we've set out other parameters as well, including zero waste. We'd like to. We think it's probably going to be difficult to get there. We feel that we've got to set these lofty aspirations in order to get as far down that road as we possibly can. We're already looking at how we can improve the process of recycling, how we can employ circular processes, not just in building buildings, but also in the use of buildings, so that a building might be more adaptable, more recyclable in future, but also encourages its occupants to lead a low waste lifestyle and lead a low carbon lifestyle.
Yeah, I think those are really fundamental goals of ours, to try and get to a point of delivering zero carbon homes and zero waste homes. But like you say, it's an ambitious target, but I think it's good for us to overreach to try and get to that target. But the thing that's come apparent to me is that there's a lot of greenwashing out there. A lot of these goals, like people talk about net zero carbon homes. Net zero carbon in terms of constructing it is one thing, but then net zero carbon in its use as well is a very different thing. How do we get to both of those?
It's a very good question. I'm going to start with a little quote from another famous Howard.
More famous than me.
Another famous Howard Odum. He's an ecosystems ecologist, so he looked at the impact of different behaviours on different ecosystems. And he observed quite famously that there's no free material or energy. Even when our goal is to design with natural systems, we're inevitably diverting energy and material from one use to another, which can result in depletion or disruption. So if we're trying to minimise our impact on the environment through our actions, we need to really understand how we can minimise that depletion or disruption. So yeah, and how do we do that when we're trying to maintain the lifestyle that we've all become accustomed to? And I think that's key. And I'm going to quote someone else now, Bjarke Ingels, a Danish architect who coined the phrase about 10 years ago of hedonistic sustainability. And he was coming from the standpoint that environmental design or sustainable design has had this stigma that it has to almost hurt to do good. You're not going to get, and I think what he's trying to say there is that the product in terms of the building isn't going to be as good if it's sustainably designed or as luxurious potentially as if it had been designed in a traditional way. So that's the question. How do we maintain our standard of living while minimizing our impact on the environment? And I think that is the crux of my job at the moment, is to ask the questions that lead us to those answers. How do we do that? In terms of development, our first step on the journey is the identification of the site that we want to build on. So what can we do first? We can make sure that that site is in a sustainable location, that it's close to public transport, or that there's good opportunity for people-powered transport, such as bikes, or as we're seeing now, electric scooters perhaps. Really really trying to reduce reliance on cars. Within the next, I think, 10 or 15 years, don't quote me on this exactly, but 70 to 80% of people are going to be living in cities. So that interconnectivity and the public transport networks within cities, and we're lucky here in Manchester with the great tram system, is going to be really important, and that's a key thing for us, and something that we consciously do is try and make sure that we put our buildings in sustainable locations. First step on the journey.
Yeah.
Secondly, we'll look at what's on the site itself. Is there a building there that we can reuse? And we've done that a number of times. Mm-hmm. Kinetic in Stretford, Duke and Parr in Liverpool, where we reuse concrete frame buildings and extended, in the case of Kinetic, to convert a building from office to provide 60 apartments in a building that otherwise probably would have been knocked down.
Yeah.
It was a candidate for being knocked down, really, and I think we saved it. We did some concrete repairs and strengthened the structure in places, but we saved a huge amount of carbon there.
Yeah.
And we're doing a calculation at the moment to figure out exactly how much we did save over a traditional construction, or knocking it down and rebuilding in a traditional way.
I think that's an interesting one, because you look around and you see a lot of old Victorian mill buildings that get retained and celebrated for their features, but actually, as well as the environmental impact, we've also found beauty in some of these more modern structures as well. Like, they have got some interesting features. Like, we're sat in a building now that's an epitome of that as well, Hilton House, where the features here, the parquet flooring, the terracotta ceiling, this could have been a candidate to be knocked down as well. It's 60s or 70s?
60s,
60s building. Yeah, a 60s building, which have typically gone underappreciated from an aesthetic point of view, but actually there is aesthetic value in them, and there is actually also an environmental impact from reusing those buildings and celebrating them.
Absolutely, and that's one of the key points in a circular economy. We need to make buildings which are adaptable. So in the 60s, they took modernist principles, which basically said, provide structure and an open floor plate. So actually, when you take away all of those demountable partitions, what you end up with is actually the frame of a building which can be repurposed for modern uses. So we need to just be true to those principles sometimes, and you're right that if you are true to those principles, what comes out the other end is something that is quite beautiful and has a lot of integrity.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about my biggest regret in development now. You know what it is already. Is the fact that
wall tiles, roof tiles.
Oh no. What roof tiles do I regret?
Kinetic.
Oh no, you're on the right track. It was actually when we so Kinetic was a 60s office building and had all of the suspended ceilings in when we bought it, and we stripped it all back, and there was this beautiful what you call waffle slab, which is like a waffle iron. That's the easiest way to explain it, right?
Yeah.
And it pains me that we didn't leave that exposed as a feature in those apartments, because again, it's celebrating some of the features of those 60s buildings. That was a really cool feature from that era that would have offered something really bespoke and unique to those apartments, to have this like waffle ceiling in your apartment. And yeah, we covered it over, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah. And it's absolutely something that's just so popular with tenants, just to have something that's just not a white box like everything that's been built all over the city, really. And the same with the commercial, I'm yet to do a viewing with somebody who walks into Hilton House and doesn't fall in love with this building. And just the contrast of the building it was a few years ago. I was viewing in here last week with a guest who was just like, I can't believe what you've created here against how this building was and what it looked like and what it represented before, and it's quite extraordinary to see, really. Very proud of it.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point we're talking about here, isn't it? That there's an environmental gain from celebrating what otherwise on first glance might not make a lot of sense to celebrate. These 60s buildings, a lot of people just look at them and go, knock it down, something new. But the right intervention can create something really special, which is what we've done. Anyway, we went on a bit of a tangent there and completely interrupted you. So we were at step 2, which was if there's a building on the site. So what's
Let's
next?
keep it. No, I think just to reiterate your point there, that was a lesson learned, and I think potentially this is what. And I don't want to blow too much smoke here, but
Please don't.
I think it's a lesson learnt for CERT. And you were a young developer at the time, and that's definitely created a shift in attitude towards those little opportunities that don't look so enticing on the face of it. The value of those little opportunities, they can be maximised, and actually it looks like you're starting from a negative, but some careful thought, and this is where my job comes in. Some careful thought and some gentle persuasion in the right direction, and you can go from a negative to like a double positive, and just from appreciating those small opportunities. So
sometimes you need to make the mistakes to understand that they're mistakes, and that looking back was a mistake to do that. Yes, it helped us with the fire compliance of the building. It was the easier route at the time, but lessons learnt from that, and that has led us to be really mindful of those features in every development we've done since then. At least we've learnt from that mistake. Anyway,
so
back
the next So the next step, we look at we start to look at the site then in relation to the design of the building itself, the orientation of the site, how we might be able to maximise its orientation, whether the site has got constraints or opportunities in terms of renewables that we might be able to take advantage of. The other day we looked at a derelict mill site, and generally, as a rule of thumb, I've spoken to a few hydroelectric guys, and they say if there was been a mill there, you could probably generate hydropower from that old mill race, as long as the water infrastructure is roughly the same as it was, or can be made to be roughly the same. So this is the way that we go and appraise sites now. We're not just looking at it from a pure numbers point of view. We're looking at it to see if there are those kind of opportunities there, which, as we've just spoken about, can add value in the end. And I think that's an important point to make, is that people now and buyers are actually seeing the value in environmental design. They don't want to pay, electric energy bills are going up. They don't want to be paying £2,000-3,000 a year for electricity and water. So for us to start looking at ways that they can conserve that energy and water, I think is key, and it's something that we're already seeing as being in demand from buyers. So that's actually shifted the way that we look at and appraise sites, and it does have a material impact. Can we put some grounds? Do we have the area on the site that might not be buildable? Can we introduce habitats within that? Can we introduce surface water drainage attenuation? Can we have some sort of water storage that we can reuse and potentially use as a heat sink? Is there another means? Is it particularly windy, or these questions now are top of the list when it comes to appraising a site, and when we're standing there on site are the things that get discussed.
So, I mean, yeah, we've got aspirations to do all these things, but I'm going to ask you, what are our roadblocks? Like, what's our biggest challenges in getting to these? Like I said, we've got an aspiration of net zero homes, of net zero waste from these homes, and they are a reach. There may be an overreach, and we're overreaching to get as close as we can. But what are the big inhibitors that since you've come into the role that you've encountered to stop us getting to that net zero position?
I think the first one is cost. I think especially at the moment, we're in an inflationary environment, and we need to be realistic. We need to acknowledge if something's too expensive to deliver, it's not going to be delivered. We can talk about as many lofty ambitions as we like, but if we haven't got the economic viability there to deliver it, then ultimately there's no point. So it's finding that balance and looking at what are the key areas that we can address in order to get as close to those ambitions as possible.
There's like the low-hanging fruit, isn't there?
There is. And I mean, I think generally I would say that environmental design or sustainable design has to be a holistic process. I think you need to look at building design, location, orientation in the round. You need to look at the way that your construction methods, the way that people are going to live in the building. The whole thing needs to be considered from a sustainable standpoint. And as I said before, these aren't kind of new ideas. These ideas have been around for a while, but through economic pressures in the past, they've not quite been delivered on. Now we're seeing buyers and occupiers attach more value to a house which is energy efficient than they previously would have. Partly because bills are going up, but partly because they're becoming more aware of the impact that buildings are having on the environment. So they want to be part of the solution to it rather than the problem. So one of the big roadblocks, one of the next down from cost, is people's buying and actually getting the general public to understand what they're buying in terms of a product of a house. And I think, character's still a big draw, but people are starting to realise that if it's still got single glazed windows in it, it is going to cost them £3,000 a year to heat that house. So we're slowly knocking those roadblocks down one by one. The desire's there, and certainly I'm seeing a shift in developers' desire to deliver on those wants and needs of the general public. I think legislation hasn't always helped in the past, and I think the government, by not legislating as hard as they could have done in the past, I'm going to have a dig at the government now, of sort of kicked the can down the road a little bit.
All views expressed are those on behalf of the person expressing them, not endorsed by CERT property.
And I'm thinking specifically of one key moment in 2007, 2008, when the government rolled back from committing to making I can't remember the date, but there was a date where all new houses had to be Code 6 for sustainable homes. So then the government, as a result of the credit crunch, rolled back on that commitment and subsequently binned the Code for Sustainable Homes. So the standard that everyone had been trained in and was working towards was suddenly it was no more. And it was not a free-for-all for developers. There's been a slow progression in the conservation of energy, a section of the building regulations, which is Part L, over those years, 2013, 2016, I think, 2018. Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong, but there's been a gradual progression, but now we're going to see a big jump with the Future Home Standard, which the first part of that comes into effect this year, and then that turbocharges in 2025. So, but that was happening 10 years ago. I'm not saying that's a roadblock, because developers, and now I'll have a dig at developers, developers could have chosen to exceed those standards, but if the law's there, they're just going to, they're always just going to design to the standard.
And of course, if there's no market pressure, so if there's no push factor from legislation, you're not going to change. But also, you talked about the public's perception changing. you're not going to change if you're not going to get extra value for it as a developer. So obviously defending fellow developers here, it's not my point. I'm just trying to give perspective to it, that I can understand why it hasn't changed, but there is a dramatic need for that change, and that's why we're addressing it now ahead of tightening legislation. What our goals are today are way in advance of what the legislation is requiring us to target. We're not needing to target net zero carbon until 2050, but we're trying to get there before that. But I get why the market has moved slowly. I do think, though, he said there about legislation and not necessarily being a roadblock. I don't know, for me, obviously cost is one thing, but we've seen a dramatic increase of costs across the board for construction over the last 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Time flies when you're having fun, maybe even longer. And actually that cost inflation across the board does present an opportunity to reassess, because traditional methods of construction have become that much more expensive. Why aren't we looking at other alternatives now? So cost for me now has become a bit less of a roadblock, because we're almost like, right, it's a clean slate. I think the legislation is a big one, because some of the solutions that are out there to help us achieve the goals of getting to net zero, still aren't necessarily going to pass building regulations. And then even if they do, and this isn't legislation as such, it's almost quasi-legislation, but it's market driven. Even if it does, is that going to then get accepted by a mortgage lender? So for me, commercially, those are two sort of intertwined and really big roadblocks, like the legislation, but then also the mortgage market, which dictates whether someone can afford to buy that house or not. It's all well and good hitting net zero, but if someone can't get a mortgage and therefore can't buy it, then what was the point? So that is a real big roadblock as far as I'm concerned. And the mortgage market as a topic is a whole other conversation for a whole other day.
Can I add insurers to that?
Whilst we've got the knives out, add them all.
It's a Monday. You've just you hit on a good point there, Howard. These houses need to be mortgageable, and we're at a point now where sustainable design has got a lot of traction. There's a lot more new products coming out. Not all of them are insurable under the current legislation and current building regs, and it takes time. It takes time for these things to filter through, to become insurable, and and to become therefore mortgageable. Yeah. So that just to add that one in, that's another one, because we're looking at new techs all the time, but it takes it. And there's a lot of great ideas out there from walls built out of hemp to mushrooms and all sorts of different techs that we're looking into. But ultimately, can you mortgage a house that's built out of mushrooms?
Exactly. Paul, you just opened your eyes at that point. Something catch your interest there. You could have opened your eyes sooner.
He's just living the dream in there.
I think that was really insightful. Clearly it's a massive, far-ranging topic that we tried to condense down into quite a short episode here. So I think it's something that we'll probably pick up again on future episodes, because this isn't even scratching the surface. I mean, you've mentioned houses built out of mushrooms there. That's an episode in itself. But yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing your insights today, Chris. Really appreciate it, and good luck at helping us on that journey, achieving those goals.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next time we expect Paul to be a little bit more perky, but tune in for that one. Our next episode is actually going to be focused on one of our other key pillars, which is community. We've got some special guests lined up for that one, so should be fun. But anyway, thank you everyone for your time today. Thank you for listening, and catch you next time.
Thanks guys for tuning in to the No Bullshit Property Podcast. We love hearing feedback from our community, so take a screenshot and tag @CERT_property on Instagram to let us know what you think.
We're particularly interested in getting your feedback on the topic that we discussed today, our environmental impact. So if there's any thoughts you have, anything that you think we should be doing or addressing as developers, please do let us know. And also, if you are interested in participating, we are currently running a survey shaping the future of living with our environmental impact as a key element of that. So if you're interested in contributing to that, you can find a link to the survey in the description and let us know how you think future homes should be built and occupied and managed. And don't forget to subscribe to the series so you never miss an episode. Thanks everyone.